Growing up, my mother was never the nurturing type. She wasn't abusive, but she was selfish. She cared more about chasing her next boyfriend than she did about raising me. My dad had left when I was little, and from then on, it was just the two of us, except it never really felt that way. I learned early on to fend for myself. When I turned 16, I got a part-time job and started saving. By the time I graduated high school, I had built up a decent nest egg, enough to help me through college. I kept it safe in a separate savings account, untouched. But then, one day, I checked my balance. Zero. Every last penny was gone. My heart pounded as I frantically scrolled through my transaction history. Large withdrawals, one after another, all leading back to her. I stormed into the living room, where my mother sat on the couch, painting her nails like nothing was wrong. "Where's my money?" I demanded. She didn't even look up. "I needed it." "You what?" My voice shook with rage. She sighed dramatically, setting her nail polish down. "I had bills to pay, and you weren't using it. I was saving it for college." I shouted. She rolled her eyes. "Relax. You're young. You'll make more money. Besides, I did you a favor. That much money sitting in an account? It's a waste." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You stole from me." She huffed. "Don't be so dramatic. You're acting like I ruined your life." But she had. That night, I packed my things and left. I cut all contact, moved in with a friend, and started over. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I was determined to never let her take advantage of me again. For years, she was nothing but a ghost from my past. Until, out of the blue, she called. I stared at the number on my screen, debating whether to pick up. Curiosity got the better of me. The moment I answered, she started sobbing. "I need your help," she choked out. "I need $5,000. It's an emergency." I nearly laughed. "You're kidding, right?" "It's my husband," she said. "He's in trouble, and I don't know what to do." I hadn't heard from her in years, and now she wanted money? "Why would I help you?" I asked coldly. She sniffled. "Because I'm your mother." I clenched my jaw. "Funny," I said. "You weren't my mother when you emptied my savings account and left me with nothing." Then I hung up. But something told me this wasn't over. I stared at my phone after hanging up, my heart pounding. My mother, the woman who had abandoned me and stolen everything I had, was suddenly back in my life, begging for money, and not just a little. $5,000. She had some nerve. For a few moments, I debated whether to just block her number and move on. After all, she had made her choices. She was the one who emptied my savings, who left me struggling to survive on my own. But something about the way she sounded. It wasn't just desperation. It was fear. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Against my better judgment, I sent her a text. "I'm not giving you money, but what's going on?" The response came almost instantly. "Mom, please, I don't have time for this. He's in serious trouble. They're going to hurt him if I don't get the money." I blinked at the screen. They? This wasn't just her usual nonsense. This was something else. Against every logical bone in my body, I called her back. She answered on the first ring, her breathing ragged. "Mom," I said slowly, "who is they?" A sniffle. "Then, some guys he borrowed money from. Loan sharks." I felt my stomach tighten. "You're telling me your husband is in debt to some criminals?" She exhaled shakily. "It was just supposed to be a small loan. He promised he'd pay it back, but things got out of control. Now they're threatening him." I should have hung up right then. I wanted to. But instead, I found myself asking, "How much does he owe?" $20,000, she admitted, her voice small. I nearly dropped my phone. $20,000? And you think I can help? They're demanding at least 5 by tomorrow. Or, she stopped, swallowing hard. I didn't need her to finish. I knew what she was implying. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to push back the frustration rising in my chest. "Mom, you realize how insane this is, right? You stole every penny I had and disappeared, and now you're calling me for help?" "I had no choice back then," she shot back, her voice trembling. "I was struggling." "And I wasn't?" I snapped. "You took everything from me, and I had to figure it out on my own. Why should I care about you or your husband now?" Silence. Then, quietly, she whispered, "Because I'm scared." I clenched my jaw. This was the woman who had abandoned me when I needed her most. And now, when she was the one in trouble, she suddenly wanted to play the mother card? I wasn't stupid. I knew I owed her nothing. But still, where are you? I found myself asking. A shaky breath. Then an address. I sighed, knowing I was making a mistake. I'm not promising anything. I just want to hear the full story. She let out a breath of relief. Thank you, honey. I knew you'd come through. I hung up before she could say anything else. I sat there for a long time, gripping my phone. I had a bad feeling about this, but against my better judgment, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. The drive to my mother's place was long and filled with memories I had tried to forget. I hadn't been back in years, not since the day I walked out and decided I was done with her. Now, as I pulled up in front of her small apartment complex, I had to remind myself that I wasn't here for some heartfelt reunion. I knocked on the door, and within seconds, she yanked it open. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, hair a mess, her clothes wrinkled like she hadn't slept in days. I should have felt something. Pity, maybe, concern. But all I could think about was how she never looked this wrecked when she was stealing my money years ago. "You actually came," she breathed, eyes darting behind me like she expected someone else. "Yeah. Don't thank me yet," I said coldly. "Start talking." She pulled me inside and shut the door quickly. "Look, I know I have no right to ask you for help, but I don't know what else to do." "Try being honest for once," I shot back. "Who is this guy? And how the hell did he end up owing loan sharks 20 grand? She flinched at my tone, but I didn't care. "His name is Rick," she muttered. He has a bit of a gambling problem." I let out a bitter laugh. "A bit?" She clenched her jaw. "He promised he'd win it back. He was trying to make things better for us. By digging himself into a deeper hole?" I shook my head. "You married an idiot." She bristled. "Don't talk about him like that." I folded my arms. "And you don't get to play the outraged wife when you're calling me to bail him out." Her face crumpled, and for a second, she looked like she might cry. But I had seen this act before. I wasn't falling for it. "You said these guys are threatening him?" I pressed. She nodded. "They told him if he doesn't pay at least 5 grand by tomorrow, they'll come after him. And me." I sighed heavily, running a hand through my hair. "And what do you expect me to do?" "Just lend me the money," she pleaded. "I swear I'll pay you back." I let out a slow, cold laugh. "Like you paid me back last time?" She winced. "This is different." "No, it's not," I said firmly. "It's always the same with you. Bad choices, fake apologies, and then begging for help." "Please," she whispered. "If not for me, then at least for my safety." I hated that she said it like that, like it was my responsibility. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "I need time to think." "We don't have time," she cried. "Well, that's not my problem, is it?" I snapped, turning for the door. I didn't care how desperate she was. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. But as I stepped outside and looked up at the darkening sky, a single thought gnawed at me. What if she was telling the truth this time? And what if, for the first time ever, she actually needed me? I barely slept that night, even though I kept telling myself I was done with her. Done with her lies, her manipulation, her endless cycle of bad decisions. Her words kept replaying in my mind. If not for me, then at least for my safety. I didn't owe her anything. That was the truth. She had abandoned me, stolen from me, and never once looked back. If I ignored her now, it wouldn't be cruel. It would be justice. But what if, for once, she was actually telling the truth? What if she really was in danger? By the time morning rolled around, I knew I had to make a decision. I wasn't going to hand over 5 grand just because she asked for it. But I needed to see just how deep this situation went. So, I drove back to her apartment. When she opened the door, she looked worse than before. Her hair was messy, her eyes bloodshot, like she hadn't slept either. But when she saw me, a flicker of hope crossed her face. "You came back," she breathed. I pushed past her into the apartment. "Don't get excited. I need answers. Real ones." She shut the door quickly and turned to me. I told you everything last night? No, you told me what you wanted me to hear, I cut in. Now, I want the truth. Every detail. She swallowed, then nodded, rubbing her arms as she sat down on the couch. It started a few months ago, she admitted. Rick was already in debt when we got married. I didn't know how bad it was. Then he started gambling more, convinced he could win big and fix everything. I scoffed. And you let him? She gave me a tired glare. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He started borrowing money from the wrong kind of people. I leaned against the wall. Who, exactly? She hesitated, then whispered, a guy named Luis. He runs a few underground gambling spots. If you borrow from him, you pay him back. Or else. I folded my arms. So let me guess. Rick didn't pay him back? She nodded quickly. Luis sent his guys to warn us last week. They trashed Rick's car, broke some furniture. Then last night, they called again and said if we don't give them $5,000 today, they'll come after him. And me. I sighed, rubbing my temples. And where is Rick right now? She looked away. Mom. My patience was wearing thin. She finally muttered, he ran. He packed a bag and left in the middle of the night. I stared at her, my blood boiling. He left you? She nodded, looking embarrassed. He said he'd figure something out, but I know what that means. He's gone, and now they're going to come looking for me. I let out a humorless laugh. So, let me get this straight. You married a guy who was already drowning in debt. He made it worse, and now that things are getting dangerous, he's abandoned you to deal with it. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I shook my head. And now you're expecting me to clean up this mess? She clenched her fists. I know I have no right to ask you for help. I know I screwed up, but I'm scared, okay? I sighed heavily. You really think $5,000 is going to make this go away? She bit her lip. It'll buy me time. I paced the room, debating what to do. Every instinct told me to walk away. This wasn't my problem. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. But something about the look in her eyes, pure terror, kept me from leaving. I let out a deep breath and looked at her. I'll help you, I said finally. Her eyes lit up. You will? I held up a hand. But not the way you want. I'm not just handing you money. I'll figure something out, but it's going to be on my terms. She hesitated, then nodded quickly. Okay, anything? I pulled out my phone. First, I want to talk to Luis myself. Her eyes widened. Are you insane? You can't just call him. Watch me, I muttered, scrolling through her phone. Give me his number. She hesitated, then reluctantly handed over her phone. I dialed the number, my heart pounding. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over yet. I stared at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the call button. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to let my mother deal with the consequences of her own mistakes. But I had already made my decision. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Who is this? I glanced at my mother. She looked pale, her hands gripping the arm of the couch. I took a deep breath. I'm calling about Rick's debt. There was silence on the other end. Then a slow, amused chuckle. Rick? That coward ran off. And now some stranger is calling me about his debt? I'm not a stranger, I said firmly. I'm the one who's going to make sure this gets handled. But I need to know exactly what's going on. A pause. Then Luis spoke again, his voice calm but laced with danger. You don't get to make demands, kid. Rick owed me money, and I want it. End of story. I clenched my jaw. How much, exactly? Started as $5,000, Luis said. But with interest, let's call it 8. My mother gasped. 8? That's... I held up a hand to silence her. That's a lot of interest. Luis chuckled again. That's what happens when people run instead of paying. I exhaled slowly, weighing my options. Let's say I could get you the money. How do I know you'll leave my mother alone after that? Luis's voice darkened. You don't. A chill ran down my spine. But, he continued, I'm a businessman. If you pay, I have no reason to bother her. I rubbed my temple. And if I don't? Luis sighed dramatically. Then I have to send a message. And I don't think you want that. I gritted my teeth. Give me time. You've got 48 hours, Louise said. And kid, don't try anything stupid. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my mind racing. 48 hours. 8 grand. I turned to my mother. Tell me the truth. Do you have anything left? Any savings at all? She shook her head, looking ashamed. Everything went into Rick's debts. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course it did. I needed a plan. Fast. And I had a feeling this was only going to get worse before it got better. The weight of the situation pressed down on me like a boulder. I had 48 hours to come up with $8,000, or Louise would make sure my mother regretted every choice that led her here. And despite everything she had done to me, despite the abandonment, the stolen savings, I wasn't heartless enough to walk away just yet. But that didn't mean I was willing to let her off the hook. I turned to my mother, arms crossed. So, tell me something. Why should I bail you out? After everything you've done? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. She'd used my emotions against me too many times before. I know I don't deserve your help, she admitted, her voice small, but I'm scared, and I don't know what else to do. I sighed, rubbing my temple. That's not my problem anymore. You made it mine by dragging me into this. She lowered her head in shame. I don't know how to fix this. I shook my head, frustrated. Then I guess I'll have to. Option 1. The money. I checked my own finances. Between my job and savings, I had about 5 grand I could spare, but giving it to her felt like pouring water into a sinking ship. Even if I managed to scrape up the full 8,000, what was stopping Louise from demanding more? I needed a smarter approach. Option 2. The law. I thought about calling the police. Maybe if I explained that a dangerous loan shark was after my mother, they'd step in. But what could they really do? Luis wasn't the kind of guy to operate in the open, and even if he got arrested, his associates wouldn't just forget about the debt. And worse, if Luis found out I went to the cops, he might speed up his message. No, that wasn't a risk I was willing to take. Option 3, a setup. An idea started forming in my mind. It was risky, but it could work. I turned back to my mother. I need every detail about Luis. Where he operates, who he works with, where he meets people. She looked confused. Why? Because I'm not just handing him money, I said firmly. I'm going to make sure he never comes after you again. Her eyes widened. What are you going to do? I exhaled slowly, my mind racing through the details. I'm going to outplay him at his own game. This was dangerous, but it was the only way. And I wasn't about to let Luis, or my mother, ruin my life. If I was going to deal with Luis, I needed leverage. No way was I handing over $8,000 without a guarantee that this problem would disappear. I sat across from my mother, watching her fidget nervously. Tell me everything you know about Luis. She swallowed hard. I don't know much. Rick always handled things. I clenched my jaw. Then think, where did Rick meet him? How does Luis collect his payments? She hesitated, then sighed. Rick used to meet him at a pool hall downtown. It's called Blue Ace. I went with him once, but I never spoke to Luis directly. I just saw him watching from a back table. That was something. Does Luis carry cash? Does he keep records? She frowned. I don't know about records, but I saw Rick hand over cash more than once. Luis has people watching him at all times. I don't think he trusts banks. I leaned back, deep in thought. If Luis was running an operation big enough to charge 8 grand in interest, there was more money moving through his hands. And if there was one thing people like Luis feared, it was getting caught. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Hey, Mark. I need a favor. Mark had been my best friend since high school. He was also a tech genius who had a knack for digging up dirt on people who didn't want to be found. What kind of favor? Mark asked warily. I didn't hesitate. I need dirt on a guy named Luis. Loan shark. He operates out of a place called Blue Ace. Mark let out a low whistle. That's a dangerous name, man. You in trouble? Not exactly. But my mother is, and I need something to use against him. A pause. All right. Give me a few hours. I hung up and exhaled. If Mark could find anything useful, illegal transactions, past arrests, connections to other crimes, I could use it as leverage. The next morning, Mark sent me a file. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Luis had been arrested twice for illegal gambling operations but had never been convicted. Even better, there were rumors that he was still running underground poker games. It was time to make my move. I called Luis. "I have your money," I said. "Meet me at Blue Ace in an hour." Luis chuckled. "Smart kid. I'll see you soon." I hung up and turned to my mother. "Stay here." She grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What are you planning?" I pulled away. "Fixing your mess." Then I walked out the door. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about ending this once and for all. I leaned back, processing everything. Luis wasn't just some street thug. He was organized. He had rules, methods. That meant he had weaknesses. "Do you know if Luis keeps records?" I asked. She frowned. I don't know. Rick used to say Luis was careful, didn't trust banks, but he always knew exactly how much people owed. So, Luis either kept records somewhere or had someone keeping track for him. Either way, that gave me an idea. I stood up. "I'm going to the Blue Ace." My mother's eyes widened. "Are you insane? You can't just walk in there." "I'm not going in to start a fight," I said. "I just need to see what I'm dealing with." Her hands trembled. "Please, just stay out of it. If we can get the money, maybe we can make this all go away." I scoffed. "And then what? Luis just lets this slide?" "No, Mom. If I do this, I'm making sure it's the last time you ever have to deal with him." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Stay here. Don't answer the door for anyone." As I drove to the Blue Ace, my mind raced through my options. I wasn't just going to hand over money. I needed leverage. Dirt on Luis. A way to turn the tables. The Blue Ace was in a rundown part of town, the kind of place where people minded their own business. I parked a block away and approached cautiously. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. A few guys played pool, but my attention went straight to the back, where a man sat watching everything. Luis. He was older than I expected, maybe mid-40s, wearing a sharp suit that clashed with the grime of the place. Two men flanked him. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. His gaze flicked to me. "You lost, kid?" I met his eyes, my heart pounding. "I'm here to talk about Rick's debt." A slow, amused smile crossed his lips. "That's so?" This was it. No turning back. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Yeah, but I'm not here to pay. I'm here to make a deal." Luis leaned back, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "A deal?" he echoed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You must think you've got something I want." I forced myself to hold his gaze. "I know I do." His men shifted, sensing the tension. One of them, a heavy-set guy with a scar along his jaw, exhaled sharply. "You got a death wish, kid?" I ignored him. "Rick's debt, whatever number you put on it, it's just leverage for you. But I'm willing to bet you have bigger problems." Luis arched a brow. "Enlighten me." I leaned forward. "I know you keep records. You have to. Someone like you, running an operation this big. You don't just keep it all in your head." He chuckled. "And I want them." That wiped the amusement from his face. His grip tightened on his glass. "You're either very brave or very stupid." I kept my voice steady. "Maybe both. But think about it. You've got enemies. People who'd pay good money to see you fall. I bet those records could be worth a hell of a lot more than my brother's debt." Scarjaw stepped forward, but Luis lifted a hand, stopping him. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed, setting his drink down. "You remind me of your brother." I tensed. "Yeah." Luis nodded. "Rick had guts too. But guts only take you so far." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Let's say I do have records. And let's say you somehow got your hands on them. What then?" I didn't flinch. "Then you clear my family's name. You leave us alone." Silence stretched between us. Luis tapped his fingers against the table, considering. Then, he smiled. "You know what? I like you." He glanced at Scarjaw. "Give the kid a tour." Before I could react, a sharp pain exploded in the back of my head. The world spun. Darkness. When I came to, I was in the trunk of a car, my wrists bound. The smell of gasoline and rust filled my nose. Louis' voice echoed in my mind. Guts only take you so far. I had made my move. Now, I had to survive it.